Hello, today we're gonna cover the data visibility in MongoDB. So what is this thing? Okay, we're gonna cover how you can restrict access to data in your server side. So sometimes you don't really want everybody accessing all the data fields or all the data objects you got inside your MongoDB. And also you don't want requests for data. Imagine you have an object and it's kind of restricted only to some group of users. And then if a user is making a request to access that data, is saying, okay, I want this field, then you know how to deal with that. So let's start. So, okay, everything is about access rights, okay? You need to disable fields, access to fields, and also you need to mask or hide the response. So for the field access layer, you need to define on your views or your controllers, when some people are requesting some data, then on the request, you just check on that. And if you identify that those users are not allowed access, then you need to return an invalid request. So it will be the place to do it. Okay, what kind of data can this be about? Okay, this could be an restricted object. It could be a field. For example, imagine a download file that only some users have access to. So you can have all your data in MongoDB and then, you know, have the access visibility in a way that you can do it in your app in many different ways. You can have some kind of system way of doing it so that you define a configuration file, you know, the user groups or which users. You can do it both ways. You can define which user IDs is having access, or you can define the user groups. You can define channels. You can have all sorts of things. So that way, in the configuration, you're setting things up. So your application is you're just having a module or something common that is getting that configuration, and in the configuration you get the access rights, all the definition of how to access media or your data or some report or whatever. So it's a good way to do it. Or you just can do it in the simple way. You're doing in your view, in your API view, you're checking the request, and since you know which users should have access, then you hard code it there, you know, like, okay, if the group is in this list of groups, then I give access or not. That's the simple way, because you don't need to build configuration based on settings for access to data. But then you also need in the response, okay, sometimes you don't want people, anybody, to get a field that you need. For example, for GDPR and all these problems or privacy, you will not want anybody to get to user profile data, or you will not anybody to output sensitive data like company stats or something like that. So then you create okay, what you do is you make the query, you make a function which is returning the query, and then at the end you get a serializer, which is actually converting the output from Mongo to the output from the API. And then that serializer is the one that's going to build that. So the serializer is going to know which fields need to be hidden for some users, or for some user groups, or for some user permissions, or for some group permissions. So that would be the way to do it. Okay, about how to do the backend and the processing, there's like two options. One of them is to do a small backend processing where your backend is not really doing a lot of code. The benefit is that everything will go fast. You just push everything you get to the MongoDB, and you just get out things to the front, to the client, to the visual user. So okay, let's see both options. For the small case, the backend sends query to the MongoDB. So the front end is calling the backend, then the backend is hitting the MongoDB. But the queries will be sent to MongoDB as they are sent by the front. It will be minimum changes to the query. So you don't really need to do pre-processing and post-processing. And the benefit is that things go faster. Obviously, you don't have complete control. So if in MongoDB you want a field called first name, and in the API output you want name, then you need to convert, and then you need to do the API. So it's better to start having a structure in the MongoDB, which is kind of okay being the structure of the API output. That way you don't really need to build that output a lot. Not as much as in SQL databases, because in SQL databases you just have IDs, so you need to build them, you know. But you know, it's depends on the way you really like it and you really love it. But the good thing about the small processing is that you gain speed performance. So the backend does not build the output, but you need the restrictions for the data access, because maybe you just don't. So the backend for post-processing of the MongoDB query is just making some restrictions to the data you got from Mongo, back from Mongo. So you will just mask data. Maybe you're having email addresses or credit card numbers, probably not, right? And you need to mask the data so they don't see, you know, the whole thing. So there are all kind of restrictions. You want to hide data, you want to mask the data, you want to do post-processing, but it's gonna be minimum. It's not gonna be a lot of post-processing for most applications. So the good thing about this is that the front will send a Mongoose query that we will see in later chapter, more details about Mongoose. So the good thing about that is that the front is defining, okay, which fields do I want, the sorting, how many items I want for pagination, how I want, you know, which kind of filters I want to apply, the and, nor, or relationships, and all that kind of thing. So all that is passed to the backend, and the backend is, yeah, it's good. I recommend having just a query function where you build the query and you output it. So for the cases when you have a more complex logic, and then you need to say, okay, if this parameter is equal to that, then I build the query this way, otherwise I build it the other way. That way you have a way to control, you know, how it's gonna be the query, because you have options. Maybe you prefer to do that in the backend. You can also do it in the front. That's, you know, you're having to, depends if you have too many fronts, and it's hard to do, you know, in many channels like mobile devices, and, you know, that operation is pretty thick. So you really want to control, and it's hard for you to define everything in the backend, but everything in the front, the queries and all that. The good thing about the backend is you can do it there, you know. Now you got the big processing option. This option allows you to have more control. Obviously, it's not as fast, but, you know, with Node.js, it should be pretty fast. So the endpoints receive a list of parameters, for example, username or company Slack or something like that. And then you convert the parameters you got with the real query. So you send the parameters to a query function, and that query function is actually building the physical layer of the MongoDB where you got the data. That way you have a logical data, which is what the front is sending to you, which is kind of more user-friendly, and the front is not making the query itself. So the front is just sending a list of parameters, and then you have a query function that is building this query object, and it's the one is making the logic for the query. So it will be building the data logic query. And yeah, the good thing is about control. And then the backend will use something like serialization, with having the data from Mongo is translating to the API output. That way you decouple those two data sets. So the advantages, you got it there. So these are the options. So when you are building an application, you need to think about, okay, which users have access to sensible information? How do I control the access to data? So I hope it was helpful for you. And as always, comment below your feedback and your experiences with this kind of situations.